All right, everybody. So I went ahead and made that little video on how to wind your yarn, and now let's talk about starting your project. I have my Key to the Tree blanket yarn all wound, and I also have my Hiya flyers because that is a center out cast on, so I want to make sure that I have those ready to go. I also printed off my blanket directions, so that goes there, and I made sure that I have project bags to go with both of them, and I always like to keep a little pouch of notions in my project bags, and yes, my project bags do have bunnies on them. Both of them are bunnies, because I like bunnies. And, I make sure I have scissors, I have tapestry needles, stitch markers, post-it notes are helpful, so is a tape measure. So I just keep little notions pouches in like all of my bags. And that way, no matter which bag I pick up, I have all of my notions ready to go. So I think I even keep, yep, and I have a pen in there as well. See, I try to be prepared. Always try to be prepared. For my heady hat, I have my pattern, and I actually have the fancy pattern. Fancy, happy printed pattern, as well as my yarn all wound, and I can go ahead and make the heady cowl as well from this one skein. It only takes one skein of darning to make both. And I went ahead and grabbed some Hiya flyers in the size 3 because I want to try these actually with a hat, with an adult hat. I haven't tried them. And I am not going to check my gauge on the darny for the hat. I'm just going to cast on and go with it because I'm the designer and I've already knit it. So my gauge should be pretty close. It may be a little bit tighter on my flyers, I've noticed that, than it is with a circular needle or with double pointed needles, but I am just going to go with it, and everything should be fine there. If it doesn't fit me, it will fit Ina, so I am not as worried about that. You, however, should be. If you have not done a gauge swatch, it is very important that you take the needles you intend to use and the yarn you intend to use, and you make that gauge swatch before you cast on. I know, many of you are going to hate on me because I've told you to go do useless knitting, but it is not useless knitting. Anytime you get to spend knitting is never useless knitting. Sometimes it can be frustrating knitting, but it's never useless knitting. So it's really important that you go ahead and take your yarn and the needles you intend to use and make your gauge swatch. And I did a swatch in stockinette, so that's knit a row, purl a row, knit a row, purl a row. And it's always good to do a 4-inch swatch, especially if it's yarn you haven't worked with before. If it's yarn that you're familiar with, if you've used the darning quite a bit, and if you have, thank you, then you may not need to make a swatch that large on the needles that I have specified. But it's very important that if you have not yet worked with your yarn and your needles, that you go ahead and do that. For my Key to the Tree blanket, I am going to make a gauge swatch. So what I will do is cast on with my needles, I will cast on with my yarn, and we'll knit just a little swatch that will give me an idea of what's going to happen. Now, I have worked with the Blazing Fibers yarn before, so I have an idea of how it's going to knit up. I have an idea of how it will block, and I am not going to wash my swatch. I'm just going to do a quick check of my swatch because I have worked with this yarn and with these needles before. However, if it looks weird, if it looks like something is off, then yes, I'm going to cut it off and I am going to fully block it so that I can check my gauge and make sure that everything is okay. Now, I do have my signature needles in here. I have my Hiya interchangeables here. I like the sharps. If you are a person who, when you're knitting, likes to push the tips of your needles, you are not going to like the sharps. If you're pushing the tips of your needles with your finger, you should probably try to change the way that you knit because you're going to do some damage to your fingers in the long run. I highly recommend trying Portuguese knitting if you haven't. Or you can try continental. I happen to know both and use both depending on the occasion. So I'm going to go ahead and cast on for my heady hat, and I think that I will just go ahead and make the medium because I have a feeling that that is what will fit me or Ina best. She has a large head already. It's amazing how big that girl's head is. And I like to use a long tail cast on. You could also use a knitted on cast on for this. I do not recommend that over the thumb looped cast on. It doesn't make a very pretty edge. If you are curious about different ways to cast on, you can always check out our Black Sheep Fiber Emporium page. We do have videos up there that I have done with cast-ons. Those are also in my personal Kelly Slack Designs YouTube channel, so you're welcome to go check those out. But I made sure that I have close-up videos of how to cast on, and I'm going to do a long tail cast on and then start knitting in the round. And I don't want to bore you all, so I will stop the video for a little bit. When we come back from that, I will magically have all of my stitches cast on and we'll be ready to join in the round, and I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so I have 54 stitches on one needle, and I have 52 on my other one. So I'm going to go ahead and just make that 53, 54, and that gives me my total of my 108 stitches. And if you read my hat pattern, what it says to do is to cast on your stitches onto 4 DPNs, or double pointed needles. But you'll notice I'm not using double pointed needles, I am using my Hiya Flyers. And I wanted to make a point about that, because no matter what your pattern says, if it says double pointed needles or magic loop or 2 circulars, if you aren't comfortable with that method, you don't have to use it. Those are interchangeable methods. Double pointed needles, magic loop, and 2 circulars are interchangeable methods. And you can always choose to use one of the other methods if that's what you are more comfortable with. So just because I have said in my pattern to cast onto 4 double pointed needles, do not feel like you absolutely have to do it that way. That is the beauty of knitting, and that's the beauty of a pattern, is that you can adjust it to suit your own needs, and you can use skills and techniques that you have learned throughout the years, even if they aren't the ones that are specified in the pattern. So the next part of it is join in the round, being careful not to twist. And I can tell that I have twisted this, so I am just going to adjust and fix my needles. And I could tell that I had twisted it because one of my loops was pointed the wrong direction. And I could make it point the wrong direction. But what I like to do is go ahead and just check everything. So I'm going to hold my yarn to the back, bring my tail to the front. There, tail. And I just want to check and make sure that all of my stitches are going the same way. And one of the best ways that you can do that is actually by sitting your knitting down. And for example, I would want my cast on row, that very lovely edge, to be pointed down, all pointed down. Or in this case, I'm looking at it straight on. So I'm checking it and I'm making sure that they are all pointed up. And they are definitely all pointed up. So now what I'm going to do, because I already have my hand in position, is I'm just going to bend my needle. So bend my needle and start knitting. And you will get a little bit of a pull there at the beginning. If you are someone who has trouble with that, and you often end up with a space of yarn between your first and last stitch in a round, on that very first row you can go ahead and cast on an extra stitch. Knit that extra stitch on the first row, and on the second row then decrease that stitch away, and what that will do is it will help close up that edge. You can also take your tail and use that to pull your first and last stitch closer together when you weave your ends at the end of your piece. So I am going to establish my ribbing pattern next, and it's going to be a knit 1, purl 1, knit 2, purl 2, and I'll repeat that, knit 1, purl 1, knit 2, purl 2, all the way around this hat, and then I'll keep repeating that for 1.5 inches. So knit 1, purl 1, knit 2, and purl 2. Knit 1, purl 1, knit 2, and purl 2. And again, I will keep doing that all the way around. And you can see I have a little bit of a space right there between my first and my last stitch that has definitely opened up. But honestly, I don't worry about that too much. I'm pretty sure that when I go and back and weave in my end, that it will close itself just with me weaving that in. So I'm going to leave this, and I'll start working on that again a little bit later. I'll finish my ribbing and establishing my ribbing, and I'll show you that ribbing in the next video so that we can talk about establishing the pattern. And I want to switch now to my blanket, and I am just going to cast on 20 stitches, just 20 stitches, and go ahead and knit my little gauge swatch. And again, I'm just using a long tail cast on because that's what I need to get started. 11, 12, 13, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and 20. So there's my 20 stitches. So I'm going to take this little 20 stitches that I've cast on and make my little gauge swatch and check my gauge. So when I come back, then we'll talk about the gauge swatch and what it's telling me. All right, so I have done just a small preliminary gauge swatch on my US 2s. Double checking, yep, that is a 2. And when I take my little preliminary swatch, my gauge should be somewhere around 6 stitches per inch. A little more would be okay if it was 6.5 stitches per inch, 6.25 stitches per inch. Because I know that this yarn relaxes a little bit, but I'm going to go ahead and check my stitches per inch by just laying my little tape measure down and counting. And I'm 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Looks like I'm at 7. Just double check it. Let's try one more row. See what we get. 7. So I can already tell from my little preliminary swatch, without having blocked this in water, that I need to up my needle size. So I may need to go up to a 3, possibly a 4, in order to get the gauge that I need for this blanket. And it's very important that I have proper gauge for this blanket so I don't run out of yarn. So if you want to make your blanket bigger, you can, but I definitely recommend checking your gauge so that you know this. So what I will be doing before the next video is going ahead and knitting the edge for my hat, that ribbed edging, and I'm going to tear out my little gauge swatch and try it with 3s and 4s and see where I need to be in terms of needles for the blanket with my blazing fibers. And that is why it's very important that you go ahead and check your gauge when it is a different yarn that is called for in the pattern, or if it's a yarn that you have never worked with before, or needles you haven't used as much. I know that I knit a little bit tighter on these Hiya flyers than I do on, say, a circular or my double pointed needles. So I'm going to try a 3, try a 4, see where I land with this, and from here on out I will try to do separate videos for the hat versus the blanket, so that if you are following along and knitting one or the other, that you can just click on one of the videos. You won't have to click on both. Although you never know, I might have tips and tricks in one video that I forget to relate in the next. So until next time, make sure that you are clicking that like button on our Facebook page. Make sure that you visit our website. Don't forget that we're offering that free shipping through April 30th with the code FREESHEEP. You just have to make sure that you put in free sheep. And if you buy the yarn for one of your projects, if you put a note in the comment section on which pattern you'd like, I can send that to you free. Or if you just go ahead and put it in your cart, I will refund that money for the pattern that goes with your yarn. So, for example, if you wanted to do the Emmer Wheat Shawl and you chose a Skein of Gleam, and you bought it all together, then I will go ahead and refund the money for the shawl pattern because you bought the Gleam yarn. Same thing for the Key to the Tree baby blanket. If you go in and you buy a skein of Lilliput or Blazing Fibers or one of those other fingering weight yarns, and you buy the Key to the Tree blanket pattern as well, I will make sure that that gets refunded, or you can just leave me a note in the comments and we'll make sure that it gets emailed to you so you get a PDF copy of that. Make sure that you are hitting the like button on Facebook. Make sure that you are subscribing on YouTube. I will try to make sure that I am putting videos up wherever I can so that you can follow along and we can all craft together. Don't forget, it's blacksheepcrafttime. That's our hashtag for this little project, blacksheepcrafttime, so that you can keep us appraised of what you are working on and how your projects are coming along. I hope that we start to see some finished projects in the next few weeks, but maybe I'll see them at IOLI in July. Cross your fingers that's still on, because I know I'm still really sad about shuttlebirds. So I hope I get to see everybody at IOLI that I would have usually seen at shuttlebirds, and I'm just really sad. I was really looking forward to shuttlebirds, and now I don't get to go, and I don't know, it's kind of a sad thing. So let's knit some yarn and make ourselves a little happier. Anyway, we'll see you next time, and like I said, the next series of videos I'm going to separate it out so that the hat and the blanket are different videos and you can follow along with whichever one you want.